July 5th, 1982. This is Joe Todd. Interview of Fern Berhendt, Behrent.
Okay. Mrs. Behrendt, when were you born?
October the 26th, 1899, in Huntington County, Indiana.
Who was your father?
W.J. Campbell.
And where was he from?
He was in Huntington County. He was born in Huntington County. Yeah.
And who was your mother?
Pearl Larry. Lowery.
Was she from Indiana also?
Yeah, was all from Huntington County, Indiana.
Yeah. What did your father do?
He was a farmer.
Farmer? And how old were you when you came to Oklahoma?
I was 6 years old on October the 26th, and we came in March.
Of 1906?
I was born in 99, and then we came to this here in 1906.
How come your family came to Oklahoma?
Well, they was wanting a home, really. Indiana is a very small state, and the owners that had the property from the Civil War on, and then the young folks didn't have any place to get started on and just rent, And they got to where they was charging them half, took half, give them half rent. And that you just couldn't make a living. He had 80 acres that we farmed, and there was about 30 acres of that in pasture, and the farming. And when they had the opportunity, there's a man heard about this land being open for filing, and you get 160 acres of land, and that seemed like a lot to the men there that had been farming on 40 and 60 and 80 acres. So they come out here, and there was 15 families come from Indiana in 1906 in that area in Huntington County, and filed. And I don't hardly know how to tell this, but they was trying to have land because they were taking half that they had there, and you just couldn't make a living.
Yeah, so you were tenant farmers in Indiana?
Well,
yeah.
no, we had 80 acres,
but
some of these families that come were just they was renting, and they thought it was such a good opportunity. Well, we come out here, and of course it was just the plains. As had been cattle grazing on it, and they just thought it was a real chance, and it was a good opportunity. But coming out here with nothing here, there was no stores or post office, no towns. Well, Texoma and Stratford were on the Rock Island Railroad, and we had to drive clear to Stratford to get groceries, and it went on that summer, and we raised a pretty fair crop after we got on they plowed sod, and we got rain, and it done real well. And then fall come, and was no schools, and I had went to school in Indiana that part of the term, and so the men gathered at the Marilla store and talked it over what they could do so the children could go to school. And they decided they'd pay $1 a piece a month for each child to get a teacher. And there was a little old building that a real estate man had built. Is about 12 by 16, and they coming from Guyman with horses, it was 60 miles, you see, and they couldn't make it in a day hardly, and so they had to have a place to stay. And so the man that had filed on this land, why he let them have this house to have school. So they just fixed boxes on the floor and laid 12-inch boards on, and that was our seats. We didn't have no desk or anything. And over in the northeast corner of the room, they painted 3 boards black, and that was our blackboard, see. And we had 6 months of school. Well, then, you see, it was 1907 when Oklahoma was admitted to the state, the Union, and they had no, well, Kenton was the only town that had a post office, and that was clear to the northwest corner of the county, you know, and we was pretty well to the east and south side where we lived, and the people beginning to come in and take up land, and it was pretty well settled by 1907 and that time. And then we went, when after, in 1908 then, why they got districts laid out, school districts, you see, and we had built a little schoolhouse. I think it was about 24 feet wide and probably 36 feet long. And they was about 36 children went. They was from the primary to the 8th grade.
Was this at the Marilla School?
It was, well, they named it the Long School because Milt Long gave the land, the acre to build a schoolhouse on.
Where was that?
Well, it was in town 8, range 8, and the township I think was 3, but we had all the way from the 1st grade to the 8th grade, and whatever books, there was no books, you see, the state hadn't got around to schools yet, you know, and just whatever books you brought with here from other countries is what we used at the first year, and then the next year, well, then we began to get better organized, you know, and they got the Oklahoma books then.
How'd you come to Oklahoma?
We come on the train.
On the train?
We chartered a car, a box car, and moved all of our furniture and some of the farm implements. I think a corn planter and a plow.
Mm-hmm.
And
you bring your horses too?
No, we bought our horses in Stratford when we landed in Stratford, and we lived in a tent. And then the men come out and built a room 12 by 16, and had a little shack they put up, was going to fix for chickens, but we cooked in that until we got things organized to where we could have more room, because we was at my grandfather Larry's, and then they had he had filed on the northwest quarter, and my dad had filed on the southwest quarter, and was on this half-mile line too. And then they met at the Marilla store. They had been the family of the Ingalls had filed on that land there, and R.W. Ingle was the father, and George Ingle was son, and so they had built a store building, and George Ingle was working for a railroad, and he offered them, let them use this room, so that was our first schoolroom, see?
Mm-hmm.
And then we had 6 months school, that's all we ever had. And we finally, by 1908, we got started around with the Oklahoma books, you see. And it was still Indian territory, you know, and so.
How long did you live in the tent in Stratford?
Well, it was from about the 28th of March till the 12th day of April was when we moved out. And then we put up a tent out there, and Mother and Dad slept, and my little brother were in that, and the house they had built was about 14 by 16, and my grandfather and mother and 2 of the boys and I slept in this room. And then when my father got, he brought out lumber and to start on our house, but it was about September before we got it done, and we had moved, and my brother had a dugout, half dugout, and we moved into that as soon as they got it finished, and then that left her grandparents to.
How big was a half dugout?
Well, it was, I think it was 12 by 14, not very big. We had a range stove, and that's what we had cooked on and kept warm by.
What's a range stove?
Well, it's a cook stove with it has a kind of a hood at the top, and with two shelves to put cooking utensils or storage, you know. We brought this range stove from Indiana because we burned wood back there, but we burned coal and cow chips. That's.
Did you have to go gather cow chips?
Yeah, we had to gather cow chips, and we lots of people. That's all the fuel they had, and they were make a quick fire and a hot fire, and people would bake biscuits, you know, all the time. But it was we spent the summers of 1907 getting buildings built with no barn or anything. There was nothing, you see, and it was 2 years before we got our house completed and moved into it. We lived in this dugout, and then they in 1908 after statehood, well, we got a schoolhouse built. It was about 24 by maybe 36, and there was about 40 of us that went to school, and all the grades from the primary to the 8th grade.
Was it still on the same land, the long school?
No, they consolidate all that district, and it's the Plainview district now.
Where's that located?
Well, it's about 25 miles southeast of here. It's in range 8, about in I believe the ranges, you know, they're 6 miles wide, you know, and that Willabar district had the 7, 8, and 9 range, you know, and then there was schoolhouses. There was a school section belonged to the state that never allowed. There was 2 schools, 2 sections in a township. The middle section and the section 36 was the school land, and they didn't allow you to file on that. And
where was your claim, your father's claim? Was it
well, it was in 2-8 in section 14.
How far is that from Boise City?
Well, you see the ranges, it starts at the Mexico line is 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, 6, 7, and 8, and 9, and that takes in the county. And then each range is 6 miles wide, and it's the width of the county from the 30th parallel till the Kansas border. You see, this little strip of land here that was about 30 miles wide, you see, was they wouldn't, let's see, how do I explain it, but they was, Kansas had the border, and Texas wouldn't come below the 30th parallel. See, they wouldn't come above the Mason-Dixon line, and that left that little narrow strip, 50 miles long by about 30 miles wide. That open for filing.
That was no man's land.
That was no man's land.
Yeah. Now, when you filed, did that guarantee you a piece of land, or?
Well, if you lived on it, you had to live on it for 5 years, and then you'd prove up on it, and then it would be yours.
Now, prove up, you made improvements on it?
Well, no, the proven up, that would prove it that you had lived on it the 5 years, you see, and then they made you a deed.
How long were you able to file on land before it was all gone?
Well, you had to be on the land before 6 months, and we was about 3 months, because when they come out here and filed, they went right back to Indiana and got ready and had their sales and moved right on out here.
Well, how, who determined which claim you were going to get?
Well, that was, they would open it and for filing, and you had to go. I think the men went to Guyman, because that was the county seat of Texas County. See, and there was no towns in Cimarron County at all. See, and it was just, and they filed it, and the records went through to Woodward, and I know my grandfather had to make a trip to Woodward in 1908 about something about the filing business, and but if you stayed on your place, the 6 months out of the year, you had to be on your land, and then there was some of the people would go to work, go up in Kansas to harvest or anywhere they could get work. Some of the younger men went out in Texas for cowboys to the ranches there, but we stayed at home and worked and planted our garden and truck patch, and we always raised enough food to do us, outside of the sugar and coffee and stuff that we need to buy.
Now, that first year, 1907, you said that you built buildings during that year.
Yes.
So how did you get your food during that first year?
Well, we brought about 3 barrels of canned food with us. Now, didn't everybody do that? But we were lucky enough. My mother was always great to have a garden and can, and we had 3 barrels full of fruit. And them days they canned in tin cans and put the lid on and sealed it with sealing wax, and it kept good. And then later we got the glass jars, and the pressure cookers come along later. But we canned food anyway. We dried lots of things. We dried corn and beans, green beans, and you'd be surprised how good they were. Of course, we had no refrigeration.
Yeah.
See.
How do you dry corn or green beans?
Well,
how do you do it?
You would heat it, put it in boiling water, and so it kind of cooked through, and then you just cut that off of the corn off the cob, and we laid it on dish towels, and that absorbed some of the moisture, and lay it out in the sun if you could, and in about 3 days it would be dry enough to just put it in a sack and it would keep, because we didn't have no refrigeration.
How long would it keep?
Well, till we'd use it up, we'd just cook on it.
So we just stay just indefinitely then?
Yes, in a cup full when it dried out, or just a great big, probably a quart of corn, you put it in about a pint container, just dried down real hard. Then you put it on to cook, and it'd just come right out and be the full size of the grain. And then later, of course, we learned to preserve and cook by and can. And later years, we got pressure cookers, but nobody had ever heard of them in that days,
How big was Stratford when you first arrived there?
How much?
How big was Stratford when you arrived?
Oh, it probably was 200 people might have lived there, not much more.
How many buildings in the town?
Well, there was a hotel, and we had to stay in that about a week or 10 days before we got anything fixed up. We had to get a tent and live in that, and it blowed down in April. The first of April, we had a big windstorm and dust, and the tent pole broke in the middle and down kind of right on top of everything. So, but Uncle Irv Uncle Irv Campbell had built a house about, I think it was about 14 by 28. There was 2 rooms, and they slept in there, of course. And then, but we got in there out of the weather after the tent blew down that night, and they fixed it back up, and the men had come out to the claim to get a building built, you see, so we could get out there. And we happened to be Well, about a mile and a half from this old U.S. mill where we got water, we had to carry it.
What, a U.S.?
The old U.S. mill. You see, a ranch, the 3C Ranch had the headquarters on the Beaver River out of Texoma, about 12 miles. And they had this land leased from the government. That's what we understood. It was all free range, you see, at that time. And they run cattle. And they had drilled 8 wells out here in Cimarron County. Of course, it was just the no man's land then, but they, within a distance of about 10 miles apart, so a cow wouldn't have to walk over 5 miles to get a drink, see. And this English cattle company had these cattle in here, and they ranged from the border on the south, Stratford, and the Beaver River run through that side, but north, they could go, well, almost to the Colorado line, but the Kenton area was the only post office in that strip. And then Guyman was the next, you see. Well, we couldn't get mail out. It was, we had to go to Stratford to get your mail, and it was in about September that we got a post office.
Where was the post office?
Well, it was a mile and a half east and a half a mile south of where we lived. It was in 2-8, and this old man Engel had filed on the northwest the quarter, and he had built a little grocery store there. And then in July, I believe was when we got the post office, July 1907, we got a post office.
Who was the first postmaster?
Mr. Engel, Dave Engel. And
now you say that your claim was near one of the wells?
it was the old U.S. mill, was a mile east, west, and a half a mile south of where we live on our
What was it called, the U.S. mill?
because that was the name of the mill, I guess. I never did hear. But there was 8, I think there was 8 of those wells. And the deep well was close to where my Uncle Irv lived, and it is in section 36 of 2-8, 1-8, yeah, 1-8. And you see there's the ranges run 6 miles.
Yeah.
And this had where we could get water, that my uncle did. Then when we got moved on our place, well, we was a mile and a half from this old U.S. mill. And that was the name of the company. And it was on the fan, the fan of the mill, and in big letters, U.S. mill. And we just was lucky because there was lots of people that they had to get water from there. And there was one family that had 9 children, and he went to Kansas to harvest, and she didn't have no horses or any way to get around when they walk. And one of the girls would stay at home with the smaller children, and it was about 4 of them would walk to the well with their clothes and build a fire at this old U.S. mill, and heat the water and wash, and then carry the clothes home. And that's, there was no stores yet. Then Mr. Engel put in this store, and we got the post office, and we had this little store, so we traded with him. Well, then in the northern part of the township, there was Willowbar, and there were so many little post offices around that they lasted about maybe 4 or 5 years, and then they began to consolidate, you see. But there was the Raleigh and Samsel. This John Samsel lived, his place was right there by this old well, and he had a half dugout, and he put in a few groceries. He was a bachelor, and in July we had a rain. It just poured down, and it filled this lake, and run into his grocery store and ruined all his groceries. And he got up and left, and he just turned it over. And that was how Samsel, the post office, got his name, this John Samsel. Well, then they moved it a mile east and a mile north from where it was originated, and Mr. Richards put in a grocery store, and it was pretty long building, nice store, with galvanized material. And then Mr. Duffy will come about in 1907, and he put in a kind of a hardware, and then he had some groceries too, and that supplied us with things and made it closer. Got away from it going plumb to Stratford or Texoma for our groceries.
Now, when was Boise City?
Well, Boise City wasn't. It wasn't statehood yet. This was in 1906, and statehood wasn't until December the 7th of 1907.
Yeah, November 16th.
November 15th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1907.
And so then they wanted Hurley. There was a post office out there, and they was telling them that we're going to have a railroad through, and the Missouri Pacific was going to build this road out, and Hurley wanted to be the county seat. Well, Dobie, about 6 miles out here from Boise City, was a little old building made out of Dobies,
Yeah.
And they had a store, and so they was pushing for it, and they wanted the county seat, and it come up to a vote. And then Kenton was the only post office at the time when we come out here in the county seat, and it was clear to the northwest corner. Well, they argued about, they wanted to keep it, and the people felt like they wanted a place nearer the center. And they voted, and it tied enough. It didn't get a majority, and it didn't carry. So then they was gonna, they tried again, and they had a meeting at Dobie, had a barbecue, and it lasted 2 days. And a man got up and made a talk, and he said the sensible thing for the people to do was to locate their county seat as near the center of the county as they could. And so they agreed to it. And there was a man by the name of Boyce. Now, I don't know if this is really true or not, but his name was Boyce, and he made this talk to him, and he said, the sensible thing for people to do when they're trying to get their county seat is to centralize it in the center of the county. And so it likes just about maybe a half a mile being exactly in the county.
In the center, yeah. And so it's named after this Mr. Boyce.
Well, now I don't know if that's true or not, but they said this man's name was because I was a pretty small girl at that time, and I know that they said this man's name was Boyce, and when they agreed to it, see, after this election that didn't carry, well, the people in the east side was fighting for it over there, and Kenton had it, and so it was 1908 before we got the town, and it had 2 elections to do it, but that was.
Yeah, on the farm when you were a child, what kind of chores did you have to do?
Milk and feed hogs, and I was, my brother was a baby, and I was a tomboy, I guess, and I always helped with it, and we milked cows, and we raised hogs, and, well, the milk was good food, and then we'd make butter, and they'd churn the cream and make butter, and the storekeepers would buy it, and we'd kind of trade for our groceries.
Yeah. I need Do you remember Statehood Day?
It's November the,
November 16th.
November 16th.
Were there any big celebrations out here?
Well, yes, they had a celebration, but you see, they were fighting for the county seat. They wanted, or did I tell you that before?
Yeah.
But the big day was at Dobie, because Dobie was really wanting, it was the Northern Pacific Railroad, they was wanting it to come through, and Hurley is about 8 miles northeast of where Boise City is, and they wanted the county seat. They had a post office, and so they had a meeting. Everybody come in, and one man said, well, the sensible thing to do was to locate your county seat as near the center of the county as you can.
Yeah, that was Mr. Boyes.
Yes, Boyes. And that's what they done. And when it come up to the second vote, well, it just carried, you know.
So, did you go to any Statehood Day celebrations?
No. Already had a post office seat, and so they wanted it so bad, and Willabar, there was a man that his name was Hurley, and he had built a store out. It's about 8 miles northeast of here, and it was a nice store building, and then there was some other buildings, and there was nothing. And Dobie then was out northwest here about 5 miles, and them was the two that was vying for the county seat, see. And when they had this gathering, when this man got up and said the sensible thing to do was to center your county seat as near the center as you could, and there was a man told him that he would let him have his relinquishment.
Yeah.
160. And it's in section. It's at range 5 and section 5. It's just about as near as in the county as it.
Yeah.
And that's the way they started it.
Well, what did your sister tell you about the Statehood Day celebrations? Were they the celebrations in Dobie?
Well, yes, at Dobie. There was speeches made, and my uncle, Irv Campbell, was, when they had the first election, why, he was elected as the county commissioner from the District 3, that's the Eastern District. And they had it at Kenton. Well, Kenton was fighting. Kenton had a nice little town, and they wanted the county seat. But you see, it was just 1 mile in from the Mexico line and clear to the northwest of ours. And the people would have had to have traveled, right around 40 and 50 miles to get out there. And so they had this celebration here, and I think it was at Hurley, and that's when the man said the sensible thing to do was to locate it as near they could, and that's.
So he made that speech on Statehood Day?
In this day that they had this big celebration. See, they barbecued a beef, and a lot of people went, and so that's when, and it was in 1908 then, when we'd already had statehood. But they didn't have the county seat settled because, and Hurley was so far north, you see, and like Kenton was Hurley was in the southeast corner, and Kenton was clear out, just 2 miles from the Mexico line.
Yeah. Can you tell me, as a child on the farm, what your average day was like? What time you'd get up?
Well, we got up usually around 6:30. And we milked cows, after we got our schoolhouse built in 1908, then we just lived 3/4 of a mile from school, and we walked to school. And we had 7 cows to milk, and we had got up, and my sister and I, and helped papa milk. And I'd always milk 1 cow, and I could get that done while they was milking the rest. I was pretty small, but then we had to walk 3/4 of a mile to school. And we had just 1 teacher and all the grades.
What was the teacher's name?
Well, Harvey Brown was one of them, and Harvey Wise. And then our first school superintendent, county superintendent, she came out. It was a woman, and she came out and visited our schools, and we was give us a talk about on education and things that we could do to better ourselves. I remember those days, and we had just a 6-month school. See, I guess that's all the money they had, and I think the teacher got $25 a month.
At what did you do in the evening? What kind of chores did you do?
Well, we had milking to do and feed the hogs and hunt the eggs and shut up the chickens. And
did you help butcher hogs?
Yeah, we always butchered hogs. We'd usually butcher 3 hogs and cure the meat and fry down sausage and put lard over it and keep fresh.
Did you render lard?
Yeah, we rendered the lard.
How do you render lard?
Well, you just put on a big black iron kettle that the holes. We had one held 30 gallons, and we would when we butchered the hog, why they would cut it up, take the hams and shoulders and backbone and tenderloin out, and the fat off of that, and then we'd cut that all up in pretty small chunks, and throw it in this kettle, and that would start rendering. The lard would begin to come out, and the fire hot enough, and it'd just render every bit of the lard out, and we'd have a whole kettle full of lard, and we'd pour it into stone jars, and it would just settle down, and just white as pretty as could be.
And you poured this over sausage to preserve the sausage?
Well, yes. We'd fry sausage and put it in tin cans, and them days and then they had a lid. Would pour the lard on it, or the grease, and fry the sausage to where it was well done, and then we'd process it in boiling water a while after, and put the sealing wax on for the lids. And we raised a good garden, and beans and black-eyed peas and watermelons and cantaloupes. They were just thick as they could be, and people would come. We put out a great big patch of watermelons, and it was really, really good. But they see when the men got so worried about the school for statehood, and so they just, the only way to do was just paid so much for $1 a month for each job. I think I told you that. But
how bad were the winters out here?
well, some of them was pretty mild, and some of them was pretty bad. And when one of them northerners come in, you didn't know what it was going to be, and the snow would drift so you couldn't get out of the house hardly, and you just had to shovel snow, and then the other winters would be real mild, and maybe we'd have one snowstorm. This one blizzard we had off in the it was terrible, and we had so many people that were trucking, go to Texoma where they could make it after Boise City got started up, and the people that coming from the Adobe area out here about 6 miles north west, they would freight maize heads, it'd be 2 wagon loads, and they'd put on 4 horses on the front wagon, and they would make it to our place. We had a well and a good tank to water their horses with, and they would stay camp, and then go on to Texoma, and they'd get there the next day. Well, then the next day they'd get back to our house and go, and then back to Boise that way. And it was a long time before they got any trucks in, you know. It was about 1910, I think, or they, or some of them had got trucks and would freight and to Stratford, and then later you see when the railroad built into Elkhart, and we were hoping it'd build on through, but they stopped there and they never come across and finished the line out till it was in, let's see, sometime in the 50s that they built on out here.
When you were in school, what kind of games did you play as a child?
Oh, Black Man and Dare Base.
What's the Dare Base?
Dare Base, yeah.
What's that?
Well, they'd choose up sides, and they'd let all the little kids play, but the two biggest ones would usually choose up, and they'd try to get a pretty good even team on each side. And we had ones that was the north side of the base and the south side of the base, and then one person would go down to this other side and touch their base, and they dared them to touch it. They had it. They'd stand back, and about 3 foot out, they'd put this. You had to touch this. There was a 2x4 they had laying there, and we'd have to touch that and then run. And they'd try to catch us, and if you got caught, you had to go on the stink base, their base, and it'd be loading down. Some they've done 3 or 4 on, and it was a good exercise and a lot of fun.
What else did you play?
Oh, we played Black Man, and it was just about the same thing. They go, I don't remember exactly, but then us littler kids, we had children's game, a little smaller to us, ring around the rosy and stuff like that, you know. And one teacher for all the grades, you see, and I think I learned a lot. By watching, I kind of was so small, I sit down on the front seat, or pretty close to the front, and I'd watch them, and they diagrammed in English, you know, and on the board, and I'd watch them, and I learned a lot of that way, you know. And there was one teacher done
She taught all grades?
All grades. And we started at 9 o'clock and let out at 4, and we had to walk. Most everybody had to walk some kids walked 4 or 3 miles. And people didn't have but a team of horses, and they was busy, and they didn't have a driving horse or anything like that, and the children walked. Some of them walked as far as 3 miles.
Did you raise cattle on your farm?
Yes, we had our cows. We had about 7 head of cows that we milked, and then the bull, and they had, as they calved, you know, we'd keep the heifers and butcher the steers for meat. We always butchered a beef and about 3 hogs.
What time of year did you butcher?
Well, it'd be after, in November, in December mostly. Usually.
So you butchered in wintertime?
Yeah, wintertime, yeah. Because you had to cure the meat, and we put it in a barrel with salt, a kind of solution. There was brown sugar and saltpeter and salt, and then you boil that up and added water to it, so it covered all the meat, and it was strong enough, the brine was strong enough that it'd go clear in and cure the bone meat around the ham, cured that way. It's really delicious. And then we'd fry down the spare ribs and put lard over them and put them in a stone jar, and then as you wanted them out, you could take them out, you know, and they stayed good.
Did you do laundry?
Yeah.
How'd you do it?
Well, most everybody just washed on the board with the tub and the washboard, but we didn't have a washing machine, and you'd heat your water and put your clothes in that, and then pour the hot water over it, and it had a handle come up that side, and you just swish back and forth.
Handle it back and forth?
Yeah, and this that is connected on the lid of this there was a little thing about that big around wood, and then 4 pegs, legs, and that'd catch the clothes and keep them a swishing, around. A lot of people just washed on the boards. A lot of people didn't have.
Did you rinse them in the same machine?
No, we had tubs. We'd have 2 tubs and they'd run them out from the machine into the first water and rinse them good, and then over into the next rinse water with a little gluing in it, and then hang them out and dry them.
What about ironing? Did you?
We ironed with old sad irons on the hook stove. That's before oil stoves was. Everybody had a range stove, and we had about a set of 3 irons and flat irons, and you just when it get too cold, it wouldn't iron them. We just get another hot iron, put that in the back, and the 3 irons would keep you going pretty good.
Yeah. How much could you iron with 1 iron before it got cold?
Oh, you could get a shirt ironed but a dress took 2 change.
Did you have the iron that had the handle built in, or with the handle?
We had some of the old irons that just come up and it is solid iron, and then the handle in it, around like that with a little piece of wood on it. No, we didn't. Them didn't have wood. You had to have an iron holder to pad it. Mama would take cotton, and then she'd cut. Overhaul material was awful good for it. They didn't burn so bad, because they'd soon wear them out on them iron handles. It's hot as the iron was, And then they got the flat irons that had the handle that was it had a little button that you'd raise it up and set it on this iron. It had a little place about just, and then across here was a narrow piece of, and the handle would catch in that place, and hold it. And they were nicer because your hand didn't get so hot on that iron handle. You had to be careful because that'd burn your hand.
Yeah.
And no refrigeration of any kind. We'd fix my mother fixed a case outside the window, north window, and made shelves, and we could put she put some gunny sacks over this framework and water on it, and had a can and dripped water on it to keep warm. And then later we got a milk trough fixed out at the well, but you had to go clear out to the well to get it cream or milk or anything, No, there was never no refrigeration until along in the 40s. Yeah.
How deep was your well?
It's 312 feet. And this old man that comes to drill it, his drill stem wasn't as big as it should have been. And the most all of them dug about a 4-inch hole. Later they got a 6-inch hole because the casing is 6-inch casing about this big around, see. And then the pipe went down in that. But this well, the old man's bit wasn't big enough, and he just drilled about a 3-inch hole, or maybe a 4-inch, and then went to put the cylinder on, and then lowered the pipe, each joint, till they got it down. And it was an awful good well, but after my folks left and went to Missouri in 1912, and the man that come there didn't take care of this well, and he let there was a plug down in where the last joint was on. They put a valve in and with a place to open, and instead of having a metal lid to cap it, they just put a wood plug in it. And these people were careless, and they let the thing fill up with water, and they run back in the well and ruined that well. And my uncle then they pulled the pipe and got all they could out of it, and then he drilled a new hole and cased it. And it's a good well yet today. It works all.
You say your folks moved to Missouri in 1912?
Uh-huh.
Did you move with them?
Yes.
What part of Missouri did you move?
It was in Polk County, about 40 miles north of Springfield. But Bolivar was our county seat. And
how come you moved to Missouri?
Well, my mother never did like it out here, and Papa didn't either. And I went with them, and then I come back in 1915 to my grandparents, and I never did go back. I went.
Who was your grandfather?
G.W. Lowry. He was a wonderful man, and good Christian man. We organized our Sunday school and church, and had we'd have spelling bees for entertainment, you know, and one school would lag in another, and we'd go. A wagon load of us would go down to the south school, 3 miles south of where we lived, and they'd come up to our school and have spelling match, you know, and it was educational. And,
Now, your grandfather organized this?
well, the school teacher that would do. We had Mr. Brown was our first teacher, and then we had a Mr. Wise, Harvey Wise, and he was an awful good teacher. But you know, nowadays you just the children. It's so nice they can have all of the grades, you know, just in their teacher. But this was to get all the grades in. Each class would have about 15 minutes to recite in. And then we'd have recess, and then the afternoon, and back in the recess in the afternoon at 4 o'clock. And we walked to school. We was lucky enough that we just had about 3/4 of a mile to walk, but a lot of them walked as far as 3 miles. And people didn't have horses. They had the teams to work with, and a lot of them didn't have horses, driving horse, you know. And so we just stayed at home or walked.
Yeah.
And that was the way with the Sunday school. When we started up with Sunday school, we walked. And Mr. Haverstick organized a Sunday school in his home, and that's where we went the first 2 years. And then there was a young minister come in 1909 and held a meeting and at the Long Schoolhouse, and they organized a church. You know, that was our first.
And you came back in 1915 to your grandparents.
15.
Yeah.
And I've never been.
And your parents stayed in Missouri?
Yeah, they stayed in Missouri.
Yeah.
And my mother came out in 1930 to visit, and my grandfather died, and she died. We buried her in 2 weeks, and buried her here too. My father still lived in Missouri. It's kind of a sad affair, but
he still lives in Missouri?
No, he's been dead for 30-some years.
Yeah.
But there was 15 families come from Indiana and settled out here. And they were all so happy to get home and land of their own, because they had lived back under these circumstances where they was taking a third of what they raised. The owner would, and that's 2/3 for a family to live on, and they just had no chance to buy land because it was so high.
Did all these 15 families come out together?
Well, no, they would be, there was Uncle Irv and us and Grandpa Larry had come when we did. And then the Abbott family, there was about 2 daughters and 2 sons, and the old man come, 5 of them, I guess. And they all settled in a group south of us. They was all in range 8, 2-8. And that's where the county's laid off, you see. And I suppose every state's the same way, but there's
Do you remember World War One?
Do I? Yeah, I was married then, and my husband was carrying the mail, and that's where I met him, and we got married, and then in December, and then 28th of February, they took him to war, and he was gone 19 months before he got in France, and then our son went in World War II.
Did you do any work for the war effort in World War One?
Well, No, I don't think anything too outstanding. They had different organizations, but out in our, we live 20 miles from the Willamar community, which is from Boise City. It's in the eastern part. And the Morella, where I grew up in the Morella community, well, there was a church there. We built a church in 1918, and it's still using it. And their cemeteries were started about like this. The first one that started this Willamar Cemetery, the folks, her name was Key, and she died when their youngest son was born, and there was no cemetery, so they just went up on the corner of their place and buried her. And then he gave an acre, and that was the Willamar Cemetery. Well, it was about the same way with in the Morella community. There was a young man in 1906 when we first got out here. She died that summer, this Mrs. Dungan died. And they brought her and several miles and from where they lived and buried her up on the hill a mile east of where my grandfather was. And then she died in February, I think, and then a long boy died in August. So they took him up and buried him across the road in another place, And so the family that moved, filed on this place, found these two graves on their land, and they made them move them. They didn't want no cemetery on their place. So this Mr. Dungan, his wife had died, and he gave an acre. I don't know why he didn't do it in the first place, but so they took both bodies up and moved them over there, and that's what became the Morella Cemetery. And that was the way the Willamar Cemetery started. The mother died giving birth to a child, and no doctor, no help, and that started the Willamar Cemetery. And so now they've added, 4 acres to it, 3 acres to it. That makes it's 4 acres square. And
So after your husband was drafted in the Army, you took over his mail route?
I did.
Oh, you did?
I finished it out.
How long did you carry mail?
Well, I carried it from February to September, and it was a star route. What now rural route, was appointed by the government some way. But you bid on this route and got it. And the man that got it died, and my grandfather was one of his bondsmen, and they got Dutch. He was just a young fellow then, but he got he took it to finish it out. Well, we were married, and I took the route over and finished it out and carried it from February to September in 1919.
When did you get married?
I got married in Boise City in December the 30th, 1915. No, 1918.
Yeah. Remember the flu epidemic of 1918?
Oh, it was bad.
How many people had the flu around here?
Well, just about everybody. I tell you, it started the first ones that had it was a Reeves that lived north of Boise City, about 6 miles, and then another family there. And there was a lot of deaths that just broke out and went. And they come after me to, if I wouldn't come and help a family out that lived in the eastern part of east and southeast of Willamar. And I went there, and there was the man and 4 of the children was down with the flu, and his wife got up out of bed to take care of them, and they sent for me, and I went and stayed, and then I took down with it. And but we all got over it all right. But there's quite a few died with the flu, and And that was before we had cars much. There's a few people had cars, but not very many. And it was awful hard. And I rode horseback an awful lot for places. And after he went to the war, well, I just worked out. And then he had his homestead, and the government allowed him, and they didn't let anybody file or again, for it, and we kept our home that way. And
What kind of remedies did you use for the flu? What would you do for it?
well, the main thing was to keep him in bed, and there's when the doctor come, if he gave any medicine, why, but I don't know what it was he gave us, but the doctor came out. They called me over to a place, and I went, and the wife got up out of bed, and he went to bed, and they had 5 children, and they was all down in bed, and they sent somebody after me, and I went over there and took it. In about 3 days, I took down. But she had got up out of bed, and 2 of the boys, and he was down, and there was a little girl. But I come out of it. Then when I got up, well, I went on over to my grandfather's, and I was there about 2 days, and they come after me from Willowbar, and I went and took care of the storekeeper and his wife and 2 kids. They had the flu. We had to wash on the board. Nobody had washing machines, carry water. And I just went from one place to another all that winter, taking care of flu patients, and I felt like I was real lucky that I had it and didn't take it any.
How many people died of the flu?
Well, there was quite a few. There was, I never did count, but not as many as they did other places. Of course, we're not so thickly settled, but it seemed like that they got, if they stay in bed and take care of themselves, not to take more cold. But it was terribly painful, and your head just felt like it had split open. But
did you know Boss Neff?
Boss Neff, yes. Well, not very personally, but I knew his daughter, some of his children. He was a big. Well, he had a store in Hooker, and I think it was a hardware store, and he had. I think he had 5 daughters.
Yeah.
And did you know him? Know of him?
No, I know of him.
Well, he was a kind of a cattleman, a rancher, and I think he done a lot of good for people. But personally, I didn't know. I knew 2 of his daughters. His one daughter was, she was county, I think she's county treasurer here for several years.
Mm-hmm.
And did you know him? Know of him?
No, I know of him.
Well, he was a kind of a cattleman, a rancher, and I think he done a lot of good for people. But personally, I didn't know. I knew 2 of his daughters. His one daughter was, she was county, I think she's county treasurer here for several years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Lona Graham.
Yeah, she still lives here.
Mm-hmm.
What about?
10-foot binder, and we cut our wheat, and he cut out for some. They've done that way, and then it was later when they got the headers, and got to cutting.
And what's a header?
Well, it's the sickle. I guess is why the sickle is off to this side, and you rode the man that drove it. He stood the post of the bar come up about so high, and then there was a piece of iron come out, and you had to stand astraddle of that iron, and that he could guide it with his legs, you see, and it took 6 head of horses to pull it, you know. And then it would, the barges, we had 2 barges, take 2 barges together while they was unloading, while the other barge would come in, and that way they didn't have to wait. And they had 6 horses on the header, and then it took 2 horses each way, and of course on the 2 barges would take care of it. And they stacked their maize, you know, and then they get ready to thrash it. And that was, and then then when the combines come in, of course, that done away with all that, you know. But,
So you raise wheat out here?
yes, we raised wheat.
How many acres of wheat did you have?
Well, we have, a lot of people farm great big. We didn't, we just had a half section of land and 320 acres, and we'd usually have 160 acres of wheat, you know. And then we farmed, we learned that it's best to farm with, leave out some in summer fallets, you know, and then not just keep wheat on it all the time, and then row crop some, depending on how many cattle and horses you had. But after the tractors took over, well, there's very few no horses left anymore.
Let me see, you got married in 1915.
1918.
1918. And what was your husband's name?
Elmer J. Behrendt.
And when you got married, did you move on his farm?
Yeah, his home, yeah. His home. He had his place. And then 2 months after we were married, well, he was drafted into the service and was gone 19 months. And he was carrying the mail to Samsel, and I took over the mail route and finished it out. That I got through in September, and then we got that flu epidemic, and I just went from one place to another and worked and took care of sick people. And then on December, I went down to the Bellamy place, and there was 8 of them in bed. They had a pretty good sized house, and one of the neighbor girls had come to help, and she took down with it, and so I stayed all day and a night, and then they got another woman finally, and she got snowed in there and stayed until it was all over. They was all better, able to be up, and there was quite a few died of it. Not anybody right in our community, but around Boise City there were several died with the flu, and it was. Come in.
What about the Depression out here?
Well, it was pretty bad.
Did that affect you pretty bad?
Yes, it did. There was lots of people lost their places, you know. We had the Depression, and then we had a drought, and people they had kind of went in pretty heavy on buying headers and combines and things like that, and wheat just went down to 19 cents a bushel. And I'll tell you, it didn't pay expensive. And we cut with a header, and then in 27, one of the neighbors got a combine, and my husband, they grew up together, and he worked for him, and the combine helped out. But then when we took it to market, well, there at Keys, they just refused to buy. They was piling out on the ground, the elevator's full, and they couldn't get cars. And it went down to 19 cents a bushel. And we didn't come out, you know, farming the land, and we bought tractor, and you couldn't make payments, and so many people they just got up and quit and went to California. Well, we was too poor, we didn't go. we couldn't get away, so we stayed and stuck it through. And I raised chickens and had about 300 hens, and eggs got down to 5 cents a dozen. And I wonder sometimes, think back over it, but we was happy. We had a plenty to eat. We never went hungry. We raised our hogs and chickens with eggs, and we could eat chickens. And then we had put out fruit trees, and I'd canned cherries, and I had one apple tree and a kind of a grape harbor, and I always canned enough fruit and stuff to balance your diet, you see. And didn't everybody do that way? But we didn't. We got credit at the store, but we tried to keep it down with flour and.
So the Depression, you survived it okay then?
Yeah, well, yes, and we held on to our land. We had a half section of land, and we had his homestead, and then we had bought another quarter, and it was a very good piece of land. But I'll tell you, when you got 19 cents a bushel for wheat, it was just, well, people just went in flocks to California. Just got up and left and went to California. But they didn't do any better out there than they did here. Most of them.
Did you consider going to California?
No, never. No. I got to go on a trip one time, but no, I loved it out here. It was home, and my folks, they left and went to Missouri, and I come back in 1915 and stayed with my grandmother, and when Nash and I were married, of course, and 2 years later, I moved to the Willowbar community, and I got to go to Stillwater Farmers Week and learned a lot of things and how to preserve and can food and everything, but done my own sewing and a lot of things too. I tried to make myself useful, you know.
Yeah. Tell me about the dust storms out here.
Well, they were, it's just hardly indescribable. I tell you, we lived right in the Willowbar community then, and the man right northwest of us, it come right up to the crossroads there, and our mailbox was right there on the corner, and he plowed this land, and he plowed it about 4 inches deep, which was too deep to plow sod. You don't never want to go over 2 inches, and so he plowed it, and he raised a pretty good crop off of it, but it went to blowing. And that quarter of land blowed down he lost every bit of that ground he'd turned up. It was just flat, just like as hard as a rock. There wasn't a bit of grass or nothing else. So, well, it'd be some of the stalks of the maize sticking up. And our house was just like this was the corner. This was the court road, and our mailbox was right here, and our house was right here, and this was the crossroads. And it blowed till we had to drift that high between our well and our house.
About 3 feet?
About 30 inches.
30 inches.
And then someplace at the north of the house, it was surrounded, and we couldn't get in, we couldn't get down that road, and we had to go let the fence down and go across the fence, and it blowed. Well, I would take a blanket or a bedspread, and I'd pin it over the head of the bed, and I'd stretch it down and pin it to the foot of the bed, and we'd crawl in under there, and then in the morning the sheets would be just brown, and the floors it just blow in. So it was just terrible. And
how did you keep it out of your house, or how did you try to keep it out?
Well, we taped the windows shut and everything, but it still just nothing kept it out. And people just got up and left here in droves and went to California. Well, it wasn't over 3 years till the most of them come back. But we was too poor to get away, so we just stayed. But we milked our cows, and we had food. We never went hungry.
That's
But as
good.
far as money, I'll tell you, I couldn't even buy a 2-cent postage stamp a lot of times. And
What was the first buildings built in Boise City?
the first building?
Yeah, in Boise City.
Well, there was Allison, Mr. Allison. He had come from Lamar, Colorado, and he built a grocery store. It's on East Main Street. Do you know where the Methodist Church is? Well, it was right across the street from there. Of course, it was just all of Ball Prairie then, but they built this building, and in 1918, I don't know what year he built it, but in 1918, it burned down. And that's where they had the courthouse up in the top of this building. They had an upstairs, and they kind of used it for a lodge hall and different things for meeting places. And it burned all of the inside of it, what was Everett's store. Well, then, better clip that off a minute. There's been a grocery store, and then the upstairs, they used it for the courthouse, where they kept their records, and the commissioners met upstairs. And they had it, then it burnt down in 1917. I was carrying the mail from Samson, and I saw the smoke rolling, and I wondered what it was. The next day we heard that the courthouse had burnt down, the store building. But they saved the records. They had the records out in, it's kind of up above the ground, but it's all made out of cement and locked it, and they saved the records. And then they moved to the old Margot Hotel, which was, where the First State Bank is. It was down that street about in the next block. And it was a 2-story building, and they got that building. And that was the courthouse for years and years, from 1917 till, I think, 1926 is when they started building the courthouse. And they got it up to the basement, and part of the building, and they ran out of funds, and it just sat there. Well, the next commissioner that was come in then, they voted bonds or something and built it, finished the courthouse. And then the grocery stores, and
Who opened the first bank?
Johnson's, same one that's got it now. It was the grandfather to the Boyses. Where are they then? Lester Montgomery. I think the Johnsons have all about died off, but Lester Montgomery's son, Lester died, and then his son now is in it, and then it's also this First State Bank in Keys. He's on it.
What about WPA? Were there any projects around here?
Oh yes, they had lots of WPA.
What'd they do around here?
Well, they done road work, and they done buildings, and anything that they could do that would hire people, to help maintain a livelihood farm. A lot of workers, county workers were put on, and we never did go on anything like that. We was on the farm, and Dutch was pretty good mechanic, and he'd work over his own engines and things like that. And then in 26 we got a tractor. That's when the tractors began to come in, about 19 to 20. And then the bigger farming set in. We'd been families on a are homesteads and maybe another quarter, and some might have a whole section, but the majority of them was just 1-2 quarters of land, and we made a living that way. And I raised chickens and I set incubators and hatched my chickens and raised them, and I got a good brand of Leghorn hens, and I had my hens all certified, and I sold eggs to the hatchery at Clayton for 3 or 4 years, and I got a pretty good price. It was quite a little ways over, but gas wasn't but on about 15 cents a gallon.
What about the 3C camps? Were there any around here?
No, I think they had one up in around Kenton. I'm not positive about that, but they had them. Was in Texas County, but I don't know enough about them to know just what they. That was for training boys, wasn't it?
Well, they did a lot of conservation work.
Yeah. Well, we had an awful good county agent that helped people out, but as long as we'd been here and we knew pretty well how to farm, but everything would have been fine if that collapse hadn't come and people just left here in droves.
Who were the early prominent people in Boise City?
Well, Judge Pugh was he was the first county judge that we had, and he was an awful good man. And then the Johnsons come here in about 1915. Before that, they had the grocery stores, about 2 good grocery stores here, and it was very small. And then the Kenton had the first county seat, you see, and then they moved it here and centered it in it's just about near the center as you get it. And then when they built the courthouse, started it in 1926, and they got it up to the basement, up to the first floor, and they ran out of funds. And the commissioner that had started it, another election had come along and another man had come in.
What's his name?
Well, John Hilton was the commissioner, the one that started in our district. And Joe Brown had been commissioner in the 3rd district out in the western part. Oh, I think he had it for 5 terms. And he just was tired of it. He didn't want it. And then they started it, and they got it up to the first floor. And another election come up, and another commissioner went in our district. And so they decided then to finish the courthouse, and they did.
Was there much of did Kenton try to resist?
Oh, they resisted. They was pretty much, I won't tell you, when my uncle was county commissioner at that time, and he drove an old mare to a buggy to Kenton, and it took him 2 days to drive to Kenton, He's clear across it's just within 2 miles of the New Mexico line, And, but it was a nice little town growing, and they had their court there, met every month. And so it come up to a vote then in 1918, and they decided that would be the thing to do, and they voted it in to come to Boise City. But they didn't have no courthouse or anything, so they got had been a grocery store, and they used that. And the upstairs of it, the lodge hall, I believe is what they used. And then when in 26 they started the courthouse, they run out of money, and they got it up to just the first floor, see, and the basement all finished. And it sat there for, I think, about 4 years and then the new commissioner went in, and the 3 commissioners sifted it all out and raised enough money or bonds or something till they finished the courthouse. You know.
What did Kenton do to try to keep the courthouse?
Well, Lord, they were there. They had guns, and well, they was really gonna shoot them up.
Was there any trouble? Any shooting or anything?
Well, they didn't shoot, but they didn't. They threatened them. And Uncle Irv was still the county commissioner, and Joe Brown, I believe, was the commissioner in the West District, and of course he wanted it there, keep it out there, and people talked it over, and finally they brought it up to election, general election, and then it carried to seat it as near in the center of the county as they could.
Did this Joe Brown, did he go ahead and agree with it to move
yes,
it? Or?
he was for it. You know, he agreed. He was a real good man, I think. But the Canton people, see,
They tried to keep it.
Oh yes, they were. It's really good, and they had a pretty nice little town. The bank was out there, and this real.
How big is Kenton now?
Well, it's as big as it ever was, but there's just so many empty houses, you know, and they've lost their school. They all come to Boise City now to school. They've just got one. Well, we have our high school in Keys yet.
Do you remember Pearl Harbor Day?
Oh, yeah.
December 7th. What were you doing that day?
Well, it was on Sunday, and we went to the show, and boy would come. Our boy had he had a cold, and we drove in to bring him to the doctor, and there was a Shirley Temple show on, and we went to the show, and when we come out of the building, the fellow that ran the show, he said they've bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, it just shot through us, just like a knife pierced me, and we went home, and of course several of my uncles were in the service, you know, and it was really sad. It seemed like it affected us worse than the World War I did, because there was so many of our young men, they grown up, you know, we knew and took them. And
how many boys from around here went to the war?
Well, just about everyone that was eligible. I don't know.
Any of them killed?
Yes, we've got several. There's two buried in the Willowbar Cemetery. Well, there's several more. Let's see, the First World War, there's several boys that died, and then the World War II, there's in all of the cemeteries around. I don't know just how many, but there's quite a few we lost. Not as many as you would really think as they did in some of the cities, you know, where there's so many people went. But as sparsely settled as we are out here, why, we had a good percent each boys and men.
Do you remember when Boise City was bombed?
Yes.
Tell me about that. I've heard about that.
Well, there was a bunch of boys that they had the air base at Dalhart, and they was located out just north of town a ways, and the air base, and they was flying. It was at night, and there was a practice in bombing, and I don't know why nobody knew why they done it or made the mistake, but they flew over the town, and just there at the courthouse there at the square. Well, there was an old tin garage on the north, and they bombed that, knocked it a pretty big hole in it, and there was 2 or 3 other places, and they didn't know that it was a city. I don't think they knew it. They didn't do it intentionally, but they was just.
How big were the bombs?
Well, I don't know how, but it tore up that building, and then broke out the square, and that's where the courthouse is ever built, you know. And the square was all empty, but the main grocery store was on the west and on the north street, and it broke out some windows out of it, and then the hotel, I think, the old hotel was damaged some, and I think there was two, but right where the post office is, that building, along there, the Hall Drug Store, and that other grocery store on the street.
Was anyone injured?
No, wasn't anybody hurt. But it really scared them because they didn't know what to do, and then they found out these boys from Dalhart, and I guess I don't know what they done to them.
I was talking to Mrs. Youngs at the newspaper office, and she said at Dalhart in the bulletin board they had a great big sign that said, "Remember the Alamo, remember the Maine, remember Pearl Harbor, and for God's sake, remember Boise City."
Yeah, yeah, that's what I know. And
How many kids do you have?
just one son.
Just one son. How many grandkids?
I got 4, and let's see, I've got, I think I've got 4 great grandchildren. Here's my little great grand.
Well, do you have any comments you want to make about your farm life in the Panhandle?
Well, it was good work, and I'd say clean work. It is dirty with the dust and all like that was bad, but then anybody that farms, it's cut out to be a farmer. And of course all this newfangled things that they've got now to work with, I don't know, it's put the people in debt so bad, and there's so many people have lost out there, just couldn't make their payments,
Do you have any advice for the ranchers today out here?
The who?
Do you have any advice for the ranchers today?
Well, of course, the ranchers are, that's altogether different farming. But this state land, you see, most all of it out in here in the northwestern part, and the state have come up now for sale or something like that. And it's going to take all of the grazing land out because they're not going to allow these ranchers to run unless they're paying a pretty good for rentage, I don't know just how much to the acre, but most of them they can't afford to pay it, you see, and raise cattle. So, and there's several of the farmers, it's just like we've had a few cows, and I always milked 3 or 4 or 5 cows and sold cream and helped to buy groceries, But I quit that way back, because I'm 83 years old now, and I'm getting where I'm not
Let me
able.
regress just for 1 minute. You were born in Huntington, Indiana?
Huntington County.
How big was,
Huntington County.
what was the name of the town?
Huntington,
Huntington?
was the county seat.
Yeah.
And we lived about 6 miles from Warren, Indiana, and my folks had an 80-acre farm there.
Did you say you went to school there?
I went to school from after I was 6 in the 26th of October in 1905. Well, then I went on to school till in March 1906, and that's when we moved up to this country. When it opened for filing, and the men, there was 15 men come out here from Indiana and filed on an area down in it would be the Willowbar district, over the Boise City. There was no county. Kenton was the only town that had a.
What was the name of the school back in Indiana you attended?
Well, I went to the school was just 3/4 of a mile from our place. It's just a 1-room school.
There in Indiana?
And they just had in each district like we had here, a school district would be about so many miles square, you see. And that was the way it was back in there, and they had 1-room school.
Remember your teacher's name?
Huh?
Remember your teacher's name in Indiana?
No, I don't remember right now. Let's see.
How big was Huntington?
Well, Huntington is a pretty nice town. It's probably 25,000 now.
How big was it then when you left?
Well, I don't know. It was a lot smaller then, but we left there in 1960 and come back out here, and then I went back in 60. nine, I think, and I went up in Michigan and down in Indiana and all around through there. And it's pretty well as it was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That's why we come out here, because they would be the old men that had got pretty well healed and bought this land up for just a few dollars an acre, you know, why they own so much of it, and then they rented it out, and then they charge them half, you know. And they did furnish some of the maybe some of the horses to farm with, because there's all farming in horses. And when I went back, we had our 50th reunion. The Holmes family did, and I went back and there and visited, and they'd be as many as 6 houses to the mile, you know, 3 on each side of the road. People, 60 and 80 acres was a farm, see. And they just can't make it. You couldn't farm a tractor on that amount of land, you know. And they just still, a lot of them just still farm with horses. See. And they just can't make it. You couldn't farm a tractor on that amount of land, you know. And they just still, a lot of them just still farm with horses.
Yeah.
And some of them have, but they've got more land. I have a cousin that's farming pretty big, and he has a tractor, and of course they cut hay, but it's, I wouldn't want to go back there to live. I love it out here. The wind does blow.
Yep. Well, thank you. I think we have a good interview.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. I didn't.
Oh, thank you.